Hari Om children. Let us pass on to the next chapter, which is referred as human reproduction. We have completed human health and diseases. We pass on to the next chapter. You might have learned about the term reproduction right from your lower classes. Let us quickly recap. What is reproduction and how is it defined? Reproduction is defined as the process of giving birth to a young one or to a progeny. That is how you have learned in lower classes. As far as human reproduction is concerned, while a young one is produced, there are certain events to be followed for the production of a new organism or an offspring. Let us list out what are the events of human reproduction. The first event is known as gametogenesis. The word genesis means to form. So gametogenesis is formation of gametes. That is the first step in human reproduction, or for that matter in most of the sexually reproducing organisms. Gametogenesis is the first event. So genesis is to produce, gametogenesis to production or formation of gametes. Now gametogenesis can further be studied under spermatogenesis and oogenesis. From the word itself, it's pretty clear that spermatogenesis refers to the formation of gametes in a male, namely the sperms. So the formation of sperms in males is known as spermatogenesis, whereas the formation of an ovum in females is known as oogenesis. So we have the first step, namely gametogenesis, either as spermatogenesis or as oogenesis. Let us go on to the next event. The second event is known as insemination. The word insemination means deposition of semen from the male reproductive system to the female reproductive system, which is achieved through an act called as copulation. So copulation involves the deposition of semen from the male reproductive system to the female reproductive system. So that's the second step, insemination. The word semen is the combination of sperms along with different fluids produced in the male reproductive system. The third step is fertilization. You are very familiar with this term. Fertilization involves the union of the male and the female gamete, or the sperm and the ovum. When they unite together, that process is known as fertilization. And I'm sure you would recollect that the end product of fertilization is zygote. A single-celled zygote is the product of fertilization. So that is the third step or the third event of human reproduction. The fourth step is cleavage and blastulation. Now cleavage involves a very orderly and systematic division of a single-celled zygote into a multicellular embryo. So it's a very systematic sequential division, and the sequential division called as cleavage results in a multicellular group of cells which later on undergoes a process of blastulation, or a hollow ball of cells is formed, and that formation of a hollow ball of cell, which is known as blastulation. That process is blastulation, and The hollow ball of cells is known as the blastocyst. So this is the next step of human reproduction. Formation of blastocyst through a sequential division called as cleavage. Coming to the next step. This blastocyst, which has now developed, reaches the uterine wall of the female reproductive system and it attaches itself to the uterine wall. That very important step is known as implantation. Implantation refers to the attachment of the embryo on the wall of the uterus. That step is known as implantation. Coming to the next step is known as organogenesis. Once again, we come across this word or genesis. The word genesis is formation and organo means formation of organs. So different organs are formed from the multicellular embryo. Gradually different organs are formed and through organogenesis the embryo now becomes a fetus. As soon as organ starts developing, we call that as a fetus. The organogenesis as well as this complete period where this embryo is getting converted into fetus is known as the gestation period. Gestation period or pregnancy. Now this period in human beings lasts for 280 days. So during this 280 days of gestation, there are different changes happening within the uterus as the young one starts developing and developing different organs. Finally, the last event of human reproduction is known as parturition. Parturition is childbirth. Giving birth to a young one in scientific terminology is known as parturition. So these are the 7 steps starting with gametogenesis and ending with parturition. Let us now study about the differences between a primary sex organ and a secondary sex organ. What is the difference between a primary and a secondary sex organ? A primary sex organ is one which is capable of producing both the gametes as well as the hormones. Hormones meaning the sexual hormones. So those organs capable of producing the gametes and hormones are called as primary sex organs. So as far as a male organism or a male individual is concerned, the primary sex organ is the testes, because the testes produces the gametes, namely the sperms, as well as the hormones, namely the testosterones. So that makes the testes a primary sex organ. Now, in the case of females, obviously the ovary is the primary sex organ. Now why? Because the ovary is capable of producing the female gamete, ovum, as well as the female sexual hormones, namely the estrogen as well as the progesterone. So that makes the ovary the primary sex organ. Now, how is the secondary sex organ different from the primary sex organ? A secondary sex organ neither produces gametes nor is it involved in the production of hormones. Yet, it is important for the process of reproduction. So that is the difference between a primary and secondary. So, what are the secondary sex organs in males? The secondary sex organs in males involve a pair of seminal vesicles. It's a gland seminal vesicles, a pair of seminal vesicles, a prostate gland, as well as the Cowper's gland, along with the copulatory organ penis. So these are the secondary sexual organs, the secondary sex organs. The seminal vesicles, the prostate gland, as well as the Cowper's gland and the penis are the secondary sex organs. Now, as far as the female is concerned, the secondary sex organs involve a pair of fallopian tubes or the oviducts. A pair of fallopian tubes, the uterus, the vagina, as well as a pair of mammary glands. So you will notice that none of these organs which have been listed are involved either in the production of gametes or hormones, but they are important for the process of reproduction. So that is why we call them as secondary sex organs. Let us now study about the male reproductive system. The male reproductive system consists of a pair of testes. Okay, T-E-S, T-E-S. T-E-S, T-I-S is a singular. Testes is plural. So there's a pair of testes. These testes are extra-abdominal in their location, meaning they are placed outside the abdominal cavity. They are located in specialized sacs called as the scrotal sacs or the scrotum. Okay, so the position of the testes is extra-abdominal within the scrotal sacs. Now, please understand that the testes in a fetus is developing intra-abdominally. It develops within the abdomen, but during the 7th month of conception, the testes descends down and relocates within the scrotal sac. So it is during the 7th month that it is descending down, and it descends down through a canal called as the inguinal canal. Inguinal canal. It is descending down through the inguinal canal, and as it descends down through the inguinal canal, it draws along with it one structure called as spermatic cord. Okay, so it comes down, along with it one cord also comes down, and that cord is known as the spermatic cord. Now, what is the spermatic cord? It consists of an artery, it consists of a vein, lymphatic vessels, as well as muscles, and the one tube called as the Vas Deferens. So the spermatic cord consists of artery, vein, lymphatic vessels, muscles, and a canal called as the Vas Deferens, a tube called as the Vas Deferens. All together it is known as the spermatic cord. So the spermatic cord and the testes descends down and relocates itself in the scrotum or the scrotal sac. Now, why is this relocation so very important? This is because the scrotal sac behave as thermoregulators. It always keeps the testicular temperature at 2 to 2.5 degrees less than the body temperature. 2 to 2.5 degree less than the body temperature is maintained for the testes in order to facilitate the process of spermatogenesis. Spermatogenesis can happen only in a lower temperature. So that is the reason why the testes is relocating itself to the scrotal sac. In some individuals, due to certain reasons, the testis fails to descend down and it remains within the abdominal sac. So soon after birth, probably when the testis has not relocated, it may require surgical intervention for correction. So the failure of the testes to descend down is known as, a condition is known as cryptorchidism. Cryptorchidism is the condition when there is a failure of the testes to descend down. Obviously, when it happens, there is possibilities of, like, the spermatogenesis cannot happen in an individual where the testes has not descended down to the scrotal sac. Now, the position of testes in the scrotal sac, I told you that the scrotal sac behaves as thermoregulators. Okay, thermoregulators, keeping the testicular temperature 2 to 2.5 degrees lesser than the body temperature. Now, suppose an individual, a boy or a male, plunges into very cold water. Automatically, there is a possibility of the testicular temperature also going very, decreasing. In such a situation, the scrotal sacs, which have the presence of muscles, these muscles become turgid. Okay, they start contracting, and that causes the testes to be drawn closer to the body so that the temperature is always maintained. So very cold condition causes the scrotal sacs to constrict, causing the testes to come closer to the body cavity. On the other hand, if the body temperature is high, for example, suppose an individual is working near a furnace or where there is too much of heat, automatically the testes, the scrotal muscles starts becoming flaccid and the testes is drawn further away from the body. That is the meaning of how it functions as thermoregulators. Okay, it can either, the scrotal muscles can either bring the testes closer to the body cavity or draw it away from the body cavity in order to retain the temperature of 2 to 2.5 degrees lesser than body temperature, which is very essential for spermatogenesis. Let us now study about the TS, or the transverse section of the testis. The testis, as we have already learned, is surrounded by a scrotal sac. See, what I have represented in red color is the scrotal sac. Inner to that, this whole structure is the testis. The testis has three distinct walls. The outermost wall, which is depicted in blue, is known as Tunica Vaginalis. Okay, Tunica Vaginalis is the outermost wall. You will find that it is a continuous layer and it is seen on this side, doesn't extend to this particular region. So it's a continuous wall known as Tunica Vaginalis. Inner to the Tunica Vaginalis, just inner to that, we find the next layer, which I have depicted in black color. This is known as Tunica Albuginea. Tunica Albuginea, if you notice, it is not a continuous layer. It is not a continuous layer like Tunica Vaginalis, but it has certain ingrowth. It is septated. It grows into the interior of the testis and as septate, thus dividing the testes into almost 200 to 300 testicular lobes. Okay, I have depicted only a few, but inside each testis there are around 200 to 300 testicular lobes which are created by the inner partition of Tunica Albuginea. Then, still inner to the Tunica Albuginea, you find the innermost layer, this is which is represented in red color, and that is known as Tunica Vascularis. The word vascularis means highly vascularized or richly supplied with blood vessels. That is the meaning of Tunica Vascularis. It is richly supplied with blood vessels. So these are the three walls: Tunica Vaginalis, Tunica Albuginea and Tunica Vascularis. Now, the interior of the testes is divided into almost 200 to 300 testicular lobes. Within each testicular lobes, we find highly coiled tubes. Okay, around 2 to 3 highly coiled tubes are observed, and these tubes, okay, I am drawing 3 in this testicular lobe and 2 in the next testicular lobe. So these are highly coiled tubes, and these tubes are called as seminiferous tubules. Seminiferous tubules. Now, seminiferous tubules are those part of the testes where these sperms are actually produced. So it has a very important role. So their seminiferous tubules are located within the testicular lobes, and you find either 2 or 3 in each of these testicular lobes. From the seminiferous tubules arise short straight ducts. Okay, short straight ducts arise from each of these seminiferous tubules, and these short straight ducts are called as the tubuli recti. Tubuli recti. So these are the short straight ducts arising from the seminiferous tubules. What happens next? All these short straight ducts from all these testicular lobes, they join together to form a network. Okay, a network of tubes are thus produced. Okay, all of them join together to form a network, and this network of tubes are known as the retitestes. Okay, retitestes, R-E-T-E. Retitestes is the name of the network of tubes which are formed by the union of several tubuli recti. What happens next? From these retitestes, there again arises around 20 to 30 short straight ducts. Okay, from this network, 20 to 30 short straight ducts arise, and these short straight ducts are called as vasa efferentia. Vasa efferentia. You may have studied this last year when you have studied about tissues. Vasa efferentia contains ciliated epithelium. So it is seen within the vasa efferentia contains ciliated epithelium, and they arise from the tubuli recti. What happens next? 10 to 20 vasa efferentia arise from the network called as retitestes, and all these vasa efferentia join together to form a tube, a long tube which is known as the epididymis. This is the epididymis, and the epididymis, if you can notice, it has a caput, a body or the corpus, and the tail or the chorda. So these are the 3 parts of the epididymis. It is a pretty long tube, and you will notice that it is outside the testes. Okay, it is just outside the testes, and the epididymis in turn continues up back into the abdominal cavity as a long tube called as the Vas Deferens. We have already learned about the Vas Deferens. It is part of the Spermatic Cord. So the epididymis continues back into the abdominal cavity as the Vas Deferens. Now, there are some tubes within the testes. We call them as intratesticular tubes. Namely, it begins with the seminiferous tubules, the tubuli recti, the retitestes, and the vasa efferentia. These 4 are called as intratesticular duct system because they are all within the testes. The seminiferous tubules, the tubuli recti, the reti testes and the vasa efferentia. And the one that is outside the testes, it begins with the epididymis, continues as the vas deferens, and there are a few more structures that has to be taught to you later on. So this is the internal structure of the testes.
What is the intratesticular duct system? The intratesticular duct system, as I have already explained, begins with the seminiferous tubules where the sperms are produced. The sperms can then pass out from the seminiferous tubules into the tubuli recti and from there into the reti testes. From the reti testes, it passes on to the vasa efferentia. So all these ducts are located within the testes. Hence, we call them as the intratesticular duct system. The epididymis, we discussed about the epididymis. This is the caput or the head of the epididymis. This is the body or the corpus, and this is the tail or the cauda. Now the epididymis in turn continues as the vas deferens. It continues back into the abdominal cavity as the vas deferens. It comes out of the scrotal sac and continues into the abdominal cavity, and then what happens is there is a pair of vas deferens. See, this is the one of the testes. Since it's a lateral view, this is one testis. So the pair of vas deferens reaches the abdominal cavity and then it receives ducts from the seminal vesicle. This is one seminal vesicle. You can find another seminal vesicle on the other side. So the vas deferens receives the ducts from the seminal vesicles and now it is called as the ejaculatory duct. This portion is called as the ejaculatory duct. The ejaculatory duct continues and then it opens into the urethra. I hope you remember that the excretory system, there is a bladder. This is a urinary bladder, and from the bladder there is a urethra. In the males, the urethra is pretty long. See, it arises from the bladder and continues like this till the tip of the penis. So the ejaculatory duct opens into the urethra. Now at the junction where it opens, the urethra receives a duct from a gland called as the prostate gland. So here is the prostate gland, one single prostate gland, and it is receiving the ducts from the prostate gland. The urethra then continues, and as it continues, it receives two more ducts from the Cowper's gland, also called as a bulbourethral gland. So there's a Cowper's gland on this side and there's a Cowper's gland on the other side. Since this is a lateral view, so it continues, it receives the ducts from the Cowper's gland. So remember, there are three ducts opening. One is from the seminal vesicle, second is from the prostate gland, and third is from the Cowper's gland. And then the duct continues as the urethra. The male urethra is a very long tube. It's almost 9 to 10 centimeters long, and this part is known as the urinary part of the urethra. The initial part is known as the urinary part. This part is known as the prostatic part of the urethra. Then comes the membranous part. The membranous part is that part which receives the ducts of the Cowper's gland. So it's a very small part called as the membranous part of the urethra. Then this portion of the urethra is called as the penile part of the urethra because it passes through the penis. The penis is the male copulatory organ. It passes through the penis, the urethra passes through the penis, and finally it opens out as the urinogenital aperture or the penile meatus. It may also be called as the urinogenital aperture or the penile meatus. please remember that the urethra is a common tube for both the reproductive system as well as the urinary system. Similarly, the urinogenital aperture is a common opening for both the urinary system as well as the reproductive system. Or in other words, it is through this opening that the urine is released out. It is through the same opening that the sperms are also released out. So this is the structure of the male reproductive system. Let us now discuss about the functions of the epididymis. The epididymis secretes nutrition for the maturation of sperms. Please remember that right from the time of puberty, the male can carry out spermatogenesis, and these spermatogenesis are constantly, the sperms are constantly produced, and the sperms which are produced are stored in the epididymis. So till they are ejaculated, they are stored in the epididymis. So that is one function, and while it is stored in the epididymis also secretes nutrients for the maturation of sperms. So maturation is a function. The secretion of nutrients for maturation is a function. Similarly, storing the sperms till ejaculation is another function. And the third function is, it is within the epididymis that the sperms acquire motility. So motility happens when it is stored in the epididymis. These are the three functions of the epididymis. What is the extratesticular duct system? We learned about the intratesticular duct system. Those are the ducts which are seen within the testes. Now what is the duct system seen outer to the testis? One is the epididymis. The second is the vas deferens, which is seen going back into the abdomen. The third is the ejaculatory duct, and the fourth is the urethra. So we have the accessory duct system. If you are asked what is the accessory duct system, both the intratesticular duct system and the extratesticular duct system together forms the accessory duct system. And it is through the accessory duct system that the sperms which are formed in the seminiferous tubules are finally released out through the urethra and outside through the urinogenital aperture. This is a very brief discussion about the accessory glands found in males. We have already discussed there is a pair of seminal vesicles, then a single prostate gland, and a pair of Cowper's gland, or also known as the bulbourethral glands. And all these three glands are capable of producing secretions which, along with the sperms, are collectively called as semen. So semen is actually containing sperms as well as the fluids produced by the seminal vesicles, the prostate gland, and the bulbourethral glands.